Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and finally, I don't have to speak so quietly because my roommates are gone. Love them, but I like having a time to record. And here we are with the final classics review of the whole year. I'm recording this on the 17th, probably a week before this comes out. When am I uploading this? I have no idea. Probably a day after Christmas. So, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Hanukkah's passed, but Happy Hanukkah if you celebrate that, and Happy Holidays of whatever other things, and Happy New Year if you're watching this a little bit late. But we're gonna end the year with something explosive, and yet we're gonna call back to some old styles of music here, being big band and swing styles that have gone. Not entirely out of fashion. Their influence is still pretty huge today, but in terms of jazz, your common music critic will veer towards bebop, post-bop, art, jazz, avant-garde jazz, you name it. Third stream, if you will. I like third stream sometimes, but today we are talking about Count Basie using Neil Hefti arrangements, who is the guy who scored the original Batman series. So that's cool. But this is Basie. Or if you really want to look at the picture and do a different alternative title, the Atomic Mr. Basie, which this is known for in some circles. And you get right off the bat just a heck of a fun, explosive record with some seriously good dynamics too. For something that is so loud, it really calms down right when you want it to. And also it was 1958 when this was released, which is, I believe, the first year that 12-inch vinyl was released. Historical impact aside, let's talk about an album that is actually historically impactful for being one of the last things to really matter in terms of swing or big band, and to do a really good job at the same time with a very dynamic piano style from Mr. Basie himself. We of course have Basie. And this all starts off with an original piece, actually. I believe it's the only original piece on the whole album, The Kid from Red Bank, which is actually referring to Count Basie himself. And it is no nonsense, no messing around, straight into a quick tempo walking bass line, super iconic sound, sounds great, which is maybe one of the most quick intros to a song I've heard in my life. The usage of these swing tempos going so fast and quickly going to a different section is kind of unique to the genre, aside from modern punk, I guess you could say. But what I find really interesting is how it transitions into a piano solo. And while you could expect it to be this huge, explosive piece of very layered harmonies, instead it's actually rather minimalist. A lot of the time he's playing just individual notes or just slamming on one, using multiple fingers to just propel it forward and keep the tempo as fast as humanly possible. And every transition here is like a half verse or even just a quick little response that keeps the tempo as high as possible. It is an utterly explosive track with zero apologies. And of course, just from this first song, you hear this old-fashioned style of recording where everything's just slightly compressed and a bit noisy, which for the style, it works super well. Weird comparison, but if you're into modern harsh noise, you might like this level of noise going on here. Like the brass is just crazy loud, so that's a real highlight for me. I know that was a weird comparison, but I think it works. And next you get a song known as Duet, which doesn't really make much sense as this is a big band. It's about like 12 people, but the main duetting part is mostly Basie and the whole band being the response. But I guess the main second instrument here would be the muted trumpet solo. That sounds amazing. I'm not a guy who loves muted trumpet that much, but here I think it sounds great. And you get a much slower walking bass line that really just carves its way through the mix, or lack of a mix. I don't know if they mixed music back then. That's a topic for another time, but it just carves its way through. And as the piano layers in and the horns layer in, you get some really nice dynamics of the call and response between the horn section and Basie, which ends up going into that muted trumpet solo. It is super lax, and the melody is kind of hard to define as it's a jazz solo. It kind of goes all over the place. But what sounds really cool about it is just how lax the whole thing is, and with these really discernible motifs that just repeat. They add a lot of replay value to this song, and also just the vibe of it in general is just so serene with still a good undercurrent of energy. It's certainly a simple track. This isn't the type of jazz to be so off the rails in terms of composition, but it does exactly what it tries to do, and it does it with flying colors. And up next is the track After Supper, and it's some good old-fashioned piano-forward jazz, which honestly sounds a lot like something off of Brubeck Plays Brubeck, the way it's just so dynamic and lush until the saxophone comes in with just searing hot energy. There's a really fun call and response section between a muted trumpet and a saxophone that leads into a saxophone solo that breaks off entirely from what they were doing. But its subdued nature is something totally alien to most people today. You would really expect a lot of high impact, high energy from a saxophone solo, but I love how it kind of subverts your expectations. One thing on this track that actually really sticks out to me is the clarity of the bass. The double bass, the walking bass solo, sounds so pristinely clear, which is super impressive to me because I have even heard records under Edition of Contemporary Music, ECM, if you guys know the label, today, which feels like they have just a perfect recording and mixing style, but sometimes their bass in there gets a little bit muddy. You can't quite pick it out or discern it. I guess maybe it's meant for like really high fidelity record players, but hey, my wearing down headphones can pick out the bass on this thing like no problem. It's not the loudest instrument, but I'm sure the guy playing it is playing it like there's no tomorrow. And after all the explosiveness, the track just slowly winds down throughout the whole length of it as it turns into something very lax. Basie's very light piano playing style works really well with this. This goes into Flight of the Foo Birds. It's got this super classic and nostalgic muted trumpet sound. It sounds like something straight out of a movie, but you hear the mute get removed and the trumpet just starts blaring into a much faster tempo. It's a completely different track after the intro. It actually ushers in the most harsh and abrasive part of the whole album. Super loud horn sections, really fast tempo. The energy is completely back. It's followed by what I would claim to be a very impressive saxophone solo using a really interesting blend of techniques, from more pop-oriented single note lines to some really interesting, actually jazzy note choices that seem to break away from traditional chord choices at the time. Granted, Miles Davis was making music when this dropped, so maybe there was a little bit of influence. And I haven't talked much about drums on this album, but you get this really crispy snare roll that goes right into the final verse for just a final surge of energy, just in case if you weren't engaged enough, which you probably were, but even then it's just got you on the floor. And this goes into the track Double O. The first 10 seconds here have so much tension on the piano, it's crazy. It's a really classic sound, really classic double time swing. You've probably heard something like this before. Whether or not it's as good as Basie, I would have my doubts. And the song is mainly here just to have this super noisy saxophone solo, probably the noisiest one on the album. Honestly, probably pretty influential, or at least taking from the trends of the time, where it's just so brash and noisy. It's honestly really bold putting this on a commercial album. For me, it makes this one of my favorite tracks on the album. It has white hot energy, no time wasted. This track is nothing but gas, no breaks at all. It's awesome. And this goes into a track known as Teddy the Toad, which, like the track After Supper, really relishes in its halftime. And compositionally, it's probably one of the stronger pieces on this whole album. The way it has a lot more tension in its slower time, I find to be very interesting. It's probably got the most complexity once you hit the second verse here. You have these brass responses that are totally syncopated and can feel completely against the grain, yet they still have so much groove in them, they really work in the song. And after that, we get the track Whirlybird. What you get here is another intense intro that ushers in a more fast track, and yet the whole band kind of peels back the layers, so you get a more subdued track, which fills in its time very interestingly. I mean, for the faster stuff, you always expect the louder portions, the more explosive parts, but instead you get a track sort of bubbles and rumbles beneath the surface. And you get another one of Basie's incredible piano solos here, another one that's very minimalist, that builds enough tension after almost like a minute of playing until the whole thing hits like the most explosive part on the album. Super creative and a very satisfying conclusion to the verse. It's got a great saxophone solo with a ton of energy, but it's at its best when it reaches these octave jumps, which are just bursting with energy. It's one of the most fun parts of the album. The sax solo is so much fun, so much energy. I really can't get enough of it. And as you approach the end of the song, the horn section just starts sliding down and multiple times. It's its own little motif that the track ends with. It's so much fun. This track is nothing but fun. It's a great way to sort of segue into the second half of the album and into the more bluesy and slow song known as Midnight Blue, which has very, very minimalist bass compared to every other song here. It's much more sparse and even spacey. And the piano solo here might be the best on the record, the way it's so much more lush and it seems to fill the space exactly how it should. And the band really revels in its dissonance here. You know, you get these really thick, heavy, dissonant chords from the whole brass section. And when they finally resolve, it's so satisfying. And it's kind of a motif, so you might get a bit tired of it. But I love the way it will do this probably several times on the track and just resolve each time. It's got a ton of energy, especially for how slow it is. The energy picks up just a bit going into the final portion of the track, which is just very gratifying. And the track ultimately just concludes on these really light but almost like humorous piano hits. Such a fun way to end it. And this goes into the song known as Splanky, which they were just naming anything those days. Any song could be named anything for whatever reason. Jazz is particularly criminal for that. But the title actually makes a lot of sense as you have this really wobbly, weird groove until you get this really slick, smooth walking bass line. Feels like jazz you'd see in a movie, the way it's like so smooth. You expect to see like a cartoon cat walking down the street with a cigar to this thing. It's so retro. It's clearly what was seen as cool. I still think it's pretty cool. It's pretty fun. You've got like a sleazy horn section here that sounds kind of humorous in a way. It's so nostalgic, actually. It reminds me when I was watching like Tom and Jerry as a kid. And it's got another fantastic drum part with some excellent transitions that lead into the most explosive release of the track. It sounds awesome. The drums are kind of subdued on this whole record, really just keeping time, except for that one snare roll on that earlier track, and especially on this track right here. It's probably where the drums are most comfortable. And it actually pulls back just to do the whole thing all over again. It's a really, really simple contrast from the A, B, A, B, but there is so much punch behind the whole thing, you really can't complain. And this is when you reach maybe my favorite track on the whole thing, known as Fantail. It's got a decently quick tempo, but nothing exactly speed of light. It's a real breath of fresh air hearing it just sink into these really killer grooves instead of going for a fast tempo. It adds a lot of dynamics to the album. The trumpet motifs on this track are particularly awesome. And you get this interesting sort of bubbling, tense quality from the trumpet part. It has this motif that repeats throughout the track, and it sounds fantastic. And it's really airtight how you get and I love how airtight this track is. The way the saxophone and the drums have their own call and response section. I think it's really creative because, it's a percussion instrument, and it's not a very clear notation percussion instrument like piano. It's drums, so it doesn't feel like a super logical choice in this type of music, but it sounds awesome. It's really explosive, and it's a really nice time for the drummer to really show his chops for once. And if that doesn't sound explosive enough to you, just know this is a track with no breathing room. It goes from A to B to C to D to E really quickly, and you really don't get any time to breathe. It's a track that has almost like a linear structure, and that's something I like. I don't think we have enough linear structure songs nowadays, but motifs will go through the whole thing. It's so interesting. It's so much fun. And this goes into one of the longest tracks on the album. I believe it's the second longest, known as Lil Darlin'. And it's the only track on the album that you can hear guitar. And when it comes in, these large, really just airy chords with that natural reverb of the time, because it was just recording the room, it sounds so nice. Honestly, it could play one chord and it could be just great. It's really interesting hearing such a beautiful and mellow piece of music on an album that has been nothing but high energy. It is definitely the most low energy track on the whole album, but at the same time, it might be one of my favorites, the way it's just so lush and just so beautiful. It's a track that really is expansive with its melodies. It's a lot more slow paced, and the dynamics are great as well. It sort of swells in volumes instead of crashes. It's got a lot of interesting texture that the rest of the album didn't really touch upon much. It's such an interesting track, a fantastic way to end the album, even though nowadays, you might just end your album with a ballad, but I think this one sounds great. And that's the whole album, pretty airtight, just over 30 minutes. One of the first full-length vinyl records that existed, as far as I can tell. I don't know how many were released in the year of 1958, but I'm sure it was a lot. And of course, as a jazz album, some of you might see this as a little bit simple, but that doesn't really detract from what it's trying to do here. And what it tries to do is highly enjoyable, it's highly infectious, It's got a great structure of an album, and it really struggles to feel repetitive. So I feel like giving this one a based and red pilled, it's fun. If you're not into jazz much, this is a good record to listen to because it'll kind of slowly get you into that later stuff. Maybe get into some Brubeck after this one. That might be like one step further in the challenging direction. But I can't complain about this one. And can you guys complain about it? I'd love to hear your comments down below. Any comments, questions, or concerns? Do you like Count Basie? Do you like Brubeck? I mentioned Miles Davis, I believe, earlier. Do you like Miles Davis? Do you like jazz at all? If not, why are you watching this video? I appreciate it either way, but I would like to know. Anything else, go ahead and comment down below as well. I mean, it's a free country. Or internet, I guess. I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Any comments, questions, or concerns, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Helps me out a whole bunch. In the description box below, you'll find my Instagram, my Twitter, and my oh-so-coveted Discord server, which you guys should totally join and talk to me about whatever music you feel like. We're posting a whole bunch of stuff there right now. And, geez, other than that, that's about it. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays for whatever you celebrate out there. But have a good one, more importantly than everything. Bye.